Hi everyone, bonjour à tous, bienvenidos. I'm your host, Cole Stangler. Welcome to the 6th episode of What Do We Want? Conversations with the International Left. Bienvenue à notre 6e épisode. Pour les francophones qui nous regardent sur YouTube, je vous invite à activer les sous-titres en cliquant sur l'icône en bas à droite. Los subtítulos en español también están disponibles. Solo haz clic en el icono en la esquina inferior derecha para activarlos. Okay, so today we're going to be back in English. That's good news for me. We're going to be speaking with someone who's really at the forefront of efforts to transform politics in the United Kingdom. And now I'm not talking about the Labour Party. I'm talking, of course, about the Green Party of England and Wales. If you pay attention at all to British politics, you've seen how the party's support has skyrocketed in the polls. Their membership has tripled since last year, and they've been winning elections. In February, a seat in Parliament, more recently, scores of seats in local elections. So I'm very excited to introduce, with that said, today's guest, Mothin Ali. Ali is an anti-racist activist. He's a member of the City Council of Leeds. He also has a popular gardening channel on YouTube, which you should check out. Maybe most importantly for today's discussion, he is the deputy leader of the Green Party, serving alongside Zach Polanski. Without further ado, joining us from England is Mothin Ali.
Glad to be here.
All right, so the first question, which is the question I ask everyone that we have on, which is also the title of the show. What do you want? What is it that you're fighting for as deputy leader of the Green Party?
I mean, this is a big question. It's like, what do we want in the short term? What do we want in the long term? And what's our ultimate vision? I mean, our ultimate vision would be a world without hunger, a world without war. How can we have a world of cooperation? Now, how do we get there? Right? There's several steps on working our way to there. Whereas right now, democracy is under threat. We've got rising militarism from the US. We've got the Middle East in turmoil. We've got Russia on the rampage. We've got global instability. Now, how do we take the heat out of that and rebuild a world where we're working on mutual cooperation and mutual aid, mutual support, and working towards common humanity? That's the ultimate goal. And the way we achieve that through the short term, especially, is trying to bring in a new perspective. Because so far we've had a lot of status quo style governments. I mean, if you look at the US, you've got the Democrats and the Republicans. How far you need, it's hard to separate between them. Just like in the UK, we've got the Labour and the Conservatives, who have been the staple main two parties for the vast majority of history. And again, you can't separate between them. Once they get into power, they're very, very similar. So we need a radical alternative. And that's where we come in as the Greens, where we provide a voice for ordinary working people and provide a voice for the planet. And we've got to make sure that we can live in harmony as as part of the ecosystem.
Great. So like I said in the introduction, right, you're the deputy leader of the Green Party. And if you look at the polls, right, you guys have been skyrocketing, let's say, in recent months, gaining a lot of ground from the party you talked about, the Labour Party, which has been in power since 2024 under Keir Starmer. I mean, what's going on here? There seems to be a major shift from voters who historically vote Labour, and they're moving to the Greens, to your party. How do you explain this? What's going on here?
I mean, there's lots of issues that are going on. Like I say, there's been very little difference between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, especially when they get into power. They just become an echo chamber for the Conservative Party, and they fail to hold true to their principles. And because of that, ordinary working class people, marginalised communities have been felt like they've been left behind and taken for granted, and they needed a voice. They needed an outlet. And that's where the Greens have stepped in, where we've gone back to basics, talking about issues that connect ordinary people, that affect ordinary people, and how do we put identity politics and how we put marginal issues to one side and focus on the things that affect us all. Going back to that sort of narrative, has really, really been effective in drawing people from not just the left of Labour, but also, I mean, we're winning seats in rural areas where we're fighting the Conservatives. We're winning seats against Reform, as we did in Gorton and Denton. So we have mass appeal now. What we've got to do is just maintain that consistent narrative, make sure we speak up for what we believe in, make sure we speak up for ordinary people and put them at the very forefront of all of our thinking, rather than pandering to mega corporations, pandering to the mainstream media, and pandering to media elites, oligarchs. And as long as we speak for ordinary people and we can get that message across, our growth will continue.
So the way you're speaking, right? You're talking about ordinary people. You mentioned the oligarchs. You're talking about the working class. This way of speaking. So I want you to tell me if this is a correct assessment. But kind of one narrative, maybe it's oversimplified, but which I've heard to explain the success of the Greens is you guys have basically transformed yourselves from being a party that was more focused on, let's say, exclusively or sort of more focused on climate questions, environmental questions, into, you guys have transformed yourself into this kind of broader economic populist party. That's a surely oversimplified way of looking at things, but is that basically
I just think that's the way it's portrayed in the media, but that's massively incorrect, because our policy around taxing the wealth has been in our manifesto for the last 12 years. If you look back at the history of the Green Party, before it was the Green Party, it was called the People's Party, right? It had socialist, it had grassroots, ordinary working people at the very forefront of the thinking from its very foundation 50 years ago. So that joined with the Ecology Party to become the Green Party. So those policies have always been there. We haven't introduced anything new. And this is the thing, our policy making is very member-led, so it's decided by members at conference. So if I wanted to bring in new policy, I'd have to take that policy to conference, make sure it's debated, and then try and get it approved. I couldn't just implement something. We're not a top-down organisation in that way. And so these policies have been here for 10 plus years. All we've done is switched. We've turned a switch in the way we talk about things, and we've managed to find a way of mass appeal rather than being pigeonholed into a little niche, because we've always been a broad spectrum party. It's just that communication has improved.
Right. So another issue which we haven't mentioned yet, which seems like an important part of this, is Labour's support under Keir Starmer for Israel, or the lack of sympathy for the plight of the Palestinian people. You've been very outspoken on this issue, the genocide in Gaza. We see in the UK mass protests. A lot of voters seem extremely frustrated by the position of the current government, let's say even both major parties. Is this another issue you think that the Greens have been able to find support on, because you seem to be speaking kind of the truth about what's happening in Palestine and in Gaza, the genocide?
I mean, absolutely. Again, this is where the Labour Party and the Conservative Party align so much. Both have been very supportive of the genocide in Gaza. Keir Starmer openly said that Israel has a right to cut off water, food and electricity to hundreds and millions of innocent people. That's genocidal language, and that's support for genocide. Not only did he do that, but Emily Thornberry and his foreign secretary then went out and doubled down on it. So even when he tried to backtrack, you had the evidence from his supporters and his cheerleaders. Kemi Badenoch, the same thing. Support for genocide, but this is not the way ordinary people, regardless of whether they're British ordinary people, whether they're French ordinary people, whether they're German, whether they're American, ordinary people don't want to see other ordinary people killed. We have so much in common that ties us together. And that's why you've seen global networks and global movements against the genocide in Gaza, against the war crimes, against the land grab, against apartheid. People stand up. And one of the most disappointing things is a party that's supposed to be rooted in the labour movement and rooted in trade union organising and comes from a working class background, or supposed to be, has forgotten that, and it's now very firmly on the side of the establishment. And there's a lot of anger amongst Muslim communities, amongst global majority communities, amongst ordinary working class people, where everyone together has seen that common humanity, and that's why they've spoken up. And that's why when they see a party, a political party, actually talking about the issues that affect them or the issues that concern them, they're finding appeal in that. And that's another reason that the Greens have done really well.
So I also wanted to ask you about this upcoming election, big election coming up in the UK, a by-election, as you say in British English, special election, we say in American English, élection partielle in French. And this is in a constituency in Greater Manchester where you have a candidate on the left of the Labour Party, Andy Burnham, who's the mayor of Greater Manchester, running. And if Burnham wins this election, widely expected to make a bid to become leader of the Labour Party and potentially prime minister. So the question I want to ask is, if you have a change in leadership at the Labour Party, if you have a Keir Starmer replaced by Andy Burnham, who's more on the left of the Labour Party, does that kind of change the calculus? Does that change the way you view things, having maybe a Labour Party that could maybe go in a different direction? Or
I think we've got to be clear with Andy Burnham, he's not left. Okay, he's not left wing. He was part of Tony Blair's government, someone who was famous for dragging the Labour Party to the right. It's why the Labour Party is in the mess that it's in at the moment. Because of Tony Blair's legacy. Andy Burnham was someone who supported the Iraq War. He supported lots of wars in the Middle East. And now, even when he's asked about the genocide in Gaza, he's saying he can't judge whether it's a genocide from his seat in Manchester. And when we have people who don't have a moral compass, then we know we're just going to get the same mistakes of the current Labour Party repeated. Yes, he's got much more of a political brand and he looks more presentable, but I think it's just going to be continuity Labour. He's going to be Keir Starmer, just in a posh, a more working class accent and a nicer suit probably. But repackaging Labour doesn't change what they actually stand for. If we look at the people behind Andy Burnham, Josh Simon's one of the leading protagonists in the Labour Together movement, a really right-wing faction of the Labour Party who have got a hold of the whole Labour Party apparatus, and they're the ones who are dictating what goes on. So those same people are the same people behind Andy Burnham. So even if Andy Burnham had decency enough to try and change things, I don't think the people who are pulling the strings are going to be able to stop him, allow him the freedom to be able to do things. I think they'll still hold a tight grip on him, just like they've done with Starmer.
So shifting gears a little bit here, I wanted to ask you maybe slightly more of a personal question, and this is more really for my French audience, because France is a country where politicians tend not to speak about their religious faith in general, and where we actually have very few politicians from religious minorities who are elected. You're Muslim, and you have taught Islamic studies. The leader of your party, Zach Polanski, is Jewish. This is sort of, I think, in France, a little bit mind blowing for French people on the left. So the question I wanted to ask you is, how does your faith influence your politics, or does it not influence?
I mean, let's go back a bit. I mean, you mentioned French audiences there, and this is one of the problems with French sort of republicanism, where there's and the secular nature of the French society. They've gone to such an extreme where they've created so many barriers for Muslims, for Christians, for people of religious backgrounds to try and progress. But the fact is, those people exist. We are part of society. And if we're not represented in the political system, that all it does is create disenfranchisement. And when you have disenfranchisement, you end up with trouble in society. And that's what we can see in France with a lot of the ghettos, a lot of the sort of marginalized communities, lack of access to education for especially Muslim girls after the hijab ban, for example. Um, we have to have a society that functions and functions very well for all the people. It can't just be for a select few. And that's one of the things that I was really proud of Britain about. When I started university in the early 2000s, I thought this country was headed on a fantastic trajectory. We were, people were being integrated, people were being lifted up, changes were happening. It started to feel like there was less racism in society. And what we've got now is a massive move back to the right. All that racism that didn't really go away, it was just underground, has risen back to the surface. I think in France, that racism never really went away. It's always been there. Islamophobia has always been there. And but it's become so acceptable now. It's become so acceptable. So it's important for people like me, for people from the global majority to stand up and be counted, to stand up and say, we're here, we're part of society. How do we participate and make sure that there are roots for the next generations that are coming up? They see themselves in the political system. And I'm not dodging your question. I mean, your question was more about how does my faith impact?
It's interesting. I'm very interested to hear what you have to say. Yeah.
Yeah. How does my faith impact my political beliefs? If we now, if I start, this is the sort of issue I have. If I start talking about my religious beliefs in public, then I'm criticised for bringing religion into politics, right? If I just my mere existence is enough to trigger a lot of people. Existence in this area is enough to trigger a lot of people. But if we look at Quranic principles around wastage, for example, there's a famous saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him, is if you had a river in front of your home, right, only use enough water to wash before prayers without wasting it, even if you had a flowing river. So it's that sort of principle that flows all the way through. Even if you're in war, don't cut down trees unnecessarily. Um, um, if you're hungry, if you've got a full stomach and your neighbour's hungry, you're not a true Muslim unless you make sure that your neighbour's taken care of. Now, these are principles that are part and parcel of who I am, right? So when I look at things, and I look at communities that are like mine in the area that I represent, Gipton and Hare Hills, it's quite a deprived community. It's got a large white working class population. It's got a quite diverse population, but regardless of what background people are from, it's relatively poor. And for me, standing up for that community is more important than standing up than anything else, because those people really matter. Their interests have to be put first, and that it's understanding that common welfare that comes through religious teaching also has a big role to play.
Right. No, I mean, I ask because it's interesting because it's so different the way that, French people talk about religion and politics versus the British or the Americans, where, in the US, it's pretty common. We have now pretty kind of left populist candidates who speak openly about how, the gospel and the Christian faith for them, makes them want to defend, ordinary people and the majority. So I think about people like Raphael Warnock, the senator from Georgia. I think about James Tallarico in Texas, who talks about his Christian faith in a progressive way. Hearing you speak, it's just very different from the way people in France kind of think about religion and politics, which is why I wanted to ask the question. So let's get back to just local election results before I ask you about the far right and we move towards kind of the end of the conversation. But so you mentioned, okay, in February, I said it in the introduction too, that the Greens had a major victory. Hannah Spencer elected in a constituency in Greater Manchester, which was a very solid Labour seat. You now have 5 MPs, if I'm not mistaken, in the House of Commons. But more recently, there were local elections in the UK last month. Just quickly, I mean, how do you evaluate the Greens' score in those local elections? I know there were lots of victories in certain cities, London and Hackney, for instance. When you look at those local elections, what do you make of them? Was it a success? Was it better, worse than you anticipated? How do you view it?
I mean, let's start with a victory in Gorton and Denton in Manchester. Now, that election was so pivotal. You know, um, our elections coordinator, Faiz Hassan, he's a National Party elections coordinator. He sort of looked at that election and said, "This is the moment that we, if we win this, then everything changes in May." May's local elections, because the trajectory that we'd be on is just a continuously upward cycle. So we put everything into that election. We made sure we went out into all the communities. We had hundreds of people out pretty much every single day, campaigning, leafleting, and threw all our weight behind it. And the grassroots mobilization that we managed to achieve and getting the community out to come out and campaign and the community to come out and support us was the way that we won that election. And that set us off for a really solid base to go into May's local elections. May's local elections were the best results we've ever had. We've got something 430, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere around that figure, councillors elected. And that's just absolutely fantastic. We took over a number of councils, Lambeth, Hackney, Haringey. We took lots of councils like Manchester from being a solid Labour one to now being under threat in the next couple of years. That'll go to an overall control. Leeds, my city, has gone to an overall control. It's a Labour minority council that's running it now. And we've now hold a balance of power in lots of parts of the country. It's a result that I'm really, really happy with. There's lots of things to learn because we've done fantastic in some areas. And how do we take that message and transfer that? How do we take the lessons from those campaigns and transfer that across the country and then turn that into bigger wins in other places? There's also with any sort of when you're analysing results, you've also got to analyse the threats and weaknesses as well. And I think what we've got to work on is if we become too urban focused, could we lose our rural appeal? And how do we strike that sweet spot? How do we get that balance between the two? But our success has always come from grassroots activism. And that's the thing that we've got to maintain. And as long as we can maintain that grassroots activism and not allow space for career politicians, then we will continue to earn the trust of the British people.
Right. So another kind of takeaway from that election, and you alluded to it earlier, is kind of this rising far right that we see in the UK. The Greens are gaining traction, but also on the far right end of the spectrum, Reform, which is sort of the political electoral manifestation of this far right sentiment in the UK that we've seen in these mass marches against immigration. That was one of the big takeaways. Also, Reform, continuing to win under Nigel Farage. I know it's a huge question. We could be here for hours. We don't have hours to do this, but I mean, when you look at the situation in the UK, if you had to kind of break it down for foreign audiences, how do you explain the rise of the far right in the UK? And in France we have it, the US we have it, of course. What's going on in the UK that explains the rise of the far right?
I mean, we've got to think back to where we are. The Western nations have never really recovered from the 2009 financial crisis. We had a period of growth after that. We had a period of low interest rates after that. But who benefited? The people at the very top, there was a massive disparity between the top earners and the lowest earners. In the UK, for example, 50 families own more than 50% of the wealth in this country. 50 families. We're a country of almost 70 million people, and it's 50 families that own more than 50% of the wealth. It just doesn't make sense. And what that means is people at the very bottom, people like the community that I represent, they've seen their living standards drop massively. They've seen the opportunities for people leaving university without opportunities, saddled with debt. They've got nowhere. They've got no job offering prospects. People are leaving school without a good career track. So where do people turn? Is people turn to how do they give the main two parties a good kicking? How do they push back? How do they fight back? So far, it's always been Reform who have championed, who have pretended to be the party of the people. Nigel Farage holds a pint in one hand and a cigarette in another and pretends he's a working man. But he's the epitome of the problems in society. He's a millionaire banker, went to a privately educated school, had everything delivered to him on a plate, and he's capitalized off people's sorrow. And then he brought in the single policy that's been the most harmful to British people, which was Brexit. Brexit has made this country poorer with every financial metric that you can bring. Brexit has harmed this country. It just makes, and this person who's had such an influence on British politics over the last 20 years, he pretends that he's anti-establishment, and his marketing has been so good that people start to believe it. But people vote for him because they're fed up with the main two parties. They want an alternative. They want something they can believe in. They don't. Now, when I speak to people who might vote Reform, and I talk to them about Reform's policy around privatisation of the National Health Service, and I talk to them about their promotion of policies around lowering tax for the highest earners and things like that. People don't want that. People don't. They're not impressed by that. What they're saying to me is, look, there's no one else. And then when I tell them what we're standing for, look, we're standing for ordinary people. We're standing for a fully funded NHS. We're standing for making sure that our communities are protected and we're properly invested and building up the very lowest in society. That gap between the richest and poorest. People love that message. People really love that message. And people can identify with that because that's where the old Labour, that's where the Labour movement is grounded, not the Labour Party, the Labour movement as a whole. That's where that's grounded, and it resonates with people, and people want to be part of that, and that's one of the reasons that we're rising so much in the polls. Getting that messaging right between since the new leadership team came into power in the Green Party has been key, right? To finally put in a counterbalance to that toxic narrative where Reform just blame black and brown people, blame immigrants, blame refugees, blame Muslims for all of society's ills. The same. If you look very recently. In the last week, the same language that Nigel Farage and Reform and the people in the right wing of politics have used around Muslims, around how we're trying to infiltrate, how we're trying to take over the country, how we're trying to do, uncontrolled mass immigration, Muslims taking over. That same narrative has now shifted to the Sikh community. So with populist parties like Reform, who only have that scapegoating of a single minority group as their main policy, when they see opportunities to blame other people, other minoritized groups, other racialized groups, they'll very switch that same language to these other groups and make sure that there's more divide. And what we've got to do as ordinary people is we've got to see our common humanity, and we've got to come together as ordinary people and make sure that we're the ones who are pushing back. And that's where movements like the Green Party in the UK are really leading. We're really leading that that bond between workers again.
So I wanted to ask you about the sort of strategy for fighting the far right, which is the central kind of challenge it seems like facing all of us really. But it seems like you basically answer the question through this, focusing on kind of the common issues that bind ordinary people together. And it's telling that you immediately right started talking about the hypocrisy and contradictions of a party that pretends to be defending working class people while also defending tax cuts and policies to benefit the ultra rich. So I want to then, as we kind of move to the end here, talk about the next upcoming general election, which presumably, right, it has to be before 2029. But this is an interesting question because it's kind of like it's the path to actual power, which is in the end what presumably everyone wants, right? I mean, part of the reason why I'm doing this show is I want to talk to different dynamic left wing movements and parties that are trying to actually win, right? We're not just about protesting; it's about coming to power. So I wanted to ask you a question about the upcoming, those elections when they take place. Like, what is that? I know this we could get really in the weeds here, but just to kind of explain what the kind of goal here is so this election 2029. Is the goal to what does that look like? Because the British parliamentary system makes it so it's very hard. The election system makes it very hard to imagine the Green Party winning an outright majority in the House of Commons. Right, you need 300 plus seats. It's a first past the post system. Is the idea you have, and maybe you can't talk about this too much, but I want to ask the question regardless. Is the idea to arrive in a situation in which you'd be kind of in a coalition with other parties, including Labor? What does that look like? Actually, this idea of taking this vision you're talking about, which is very clear. You're talking about who's responsible. You're talking about the positive vision you have, but translating that into maybe governing. What does that path to power look like? I don't want to keep rambling on here. I think you understand where I'm going with this. What does the path to power look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, in an ideal world where we had an electoral system that was truly representative of the popular vote, for example, we'd be we wouldn't be looking at coalition. We'd be looking at making sure that we've got the maximum number of MPs to have the maximum influence. And the thing it goes back to is when you want a coalition or when you're thinking about a coalition, you've got to have someone that you can have some commonalities with. Like the Labour Party as it stands now, it's so toxic. It's such an environment where they've left their very principles that were founded on. The party that it is now, I wouldn't want anything to do with. Right. If it became something a bit more sensible and more traditional to what it used to stand for, then maybe we'd look at things again. But as it is now, absolutely not. Uh, so my ultimate aim is to maximize and make sure that we get as many Greens elected as possible, and that's what we managed to do in May, and we'll continue to build on that success. We've got another couple of local elections before we get to the generals. So we've got 27 and 28 local elections. Once we get through those, we'll keep building the way we are. We'll be in a much stronger position to challenge for a really, really strong general election performance. Let's just put things into perspective. We used to have maybe 50 seats that we thought there's a potential of winning for Green MPs. Hannah Spencer's victory in Gorton and Denton, that seat was something like 113th on our list. Okay, we never thought we'd have a chance there, but the campaign that we ran and the grassroots campaign that we ran, if we can continue that grassroots mobilization of communities, there's so much we can achieve across this country, even in a first past the post system. And we can make sure that we're holding other parties to account as well. because just by us being there, it changes the narrative. Do you know, if I wasn't talking about what happened in Palestine, if I wasn't talking about what's happening in Gaza, people, you wouldn't have that Overton window shifting on that. If if Zach's wasn't talking about taxing the rich, you wouldn't have Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party now thinking, oh, maybe a wealth tax is something that we can bring in. You know, we're having that influence, we're making that change already. What we've got to do is we've got to make sure that we we get the message across in a way where we're breaking down those tribal loyalties, because this is one thing about Labour voters is they can be quite tribal. There's a lot of people who are ready to switch because of a better argument, but there's a lot of people who are quite loyal, and that's because of that trade union movement and that struggle that they've gone through. But if we can get our messaging right and make sure that we're talking to people who are are not being represented by the Labour Party at the moment, and likewise people who are thinking about voting reform. I made a video. I don't know if you saw it uh, around a racist incident that I suffered, and how someone called me an effing this and that and told me to go back to where I come from. And when I told my story about how my dad worked in the steelworks, how he came here after the Second World War to rebuild this country, um, I had actual members of Restore, right? Restore is the party to the right of Reform. You go to Restore if you think Reform aren't racist enough, right? Um, I had a member of Restore message me saying, look, I'm a member of Restore. I've seen your video. Um, you talk to me more than anyone else talks to me. I'm leaving Restore and joining the Greens. And what that tells me is there's people out there, good people, decent people, who just want someone to talk to them. People who they want representation, and they've not been able to see that in political leadership, in politicians for a very long time. And if we can get back to talking to ordinary people and talking with them rather than talking at them, and we can elevate their voices, it'll be unstoppable.
Great. I mean, and you maybe have answered kind of the final question I wanted to ask you, but it has to do with this obstacle that left parties face, not just in the UK, but in Europe and the United States, which is this lack of this decline in support among working class people outside of these larger urban areas, which is I don't know if you agree with me, but it kind of it's certainly we see it in the United States, we see it in France. Where of course, right, left parties are able to win support among working class people in these larger urban areas, but it gets more difficult when you leave these certain parts of the country. It's absolutely true in the United States. That's kind of the extreme case. In France, it's unfortunately more and more the case if you look at the pattern of recent elections. It seems to be a challenge to some extent in the UK, where it seems like there's that central issue of how do you expand the green electorate, where right you're able to win over working class people, not just in the kind of urban areas, but certain rural parts of the country. And right, I guess that's sort of the ultimate challenge. And maybe you kind of have already answered it of it's talking to people about ordinary kind of bread and butter issues. But that seems to me, at least, I don't know if you agree, but like a central obstacle for the left that maybe we see in the UK also to some extent.
I, I'd agree with you if it was a traditional left wing party. But the thing is, because of the Green Movement and where a lot of our members are still predominantly from rural areas. If you look at Waveney Valley, North Herefordshire, these are really rural areas where we've got MPs in. We control Hastings Council, which is a really rural area, which is sort of conservative heartland. We can win against the Conservatives. That's one element of it. But working class people in rural areas, you look at the climate crisis, let's go back to the climate crisis. Last year we had one of the driest summers on record, right? So a huge period. It hardly rained between May and October, something like that. We had one of the lowest rainfall records. So that means people in rural areas, they're going to suffer from lack of rain, so they can't irrigate their crops, they can't feed their animals, they can't when they go to harvest, the yields are going to be much lower. When they go to sell that, they're going to demand a higher price to cover the shortfall. Food prices are going to increase for the rest of the population. That cycle, and that's just one small cycle, but that cycle intertwines us all. You know, when we talk about those kind of things that, when I was talking about how we're connected to each other, we can't separate ourselves. We're part of society, right? Every single person is part of society. What we've got to make sure is we don't forget about that conversation. We've got to make sure that we've got to we talk about things like that. We talk about the issues that food inequality affects people in rural areas, just like it does in urban areas. Income inequality affects them. The cost of living, especially energy costs, right, affect rural communities. It affects the business community. It affects urban communities. We go back to that commonality and make sure that, right, we've got a plan on how we can fix things for all of us. People are, I've got faith in the British people. I really have. And I'm sure they'll see if we can talk to them in the right way. I think they'll really like the message that we're offering.
That seems like a fantastic note to end on. So thanks so much again, Mothin Ali, for taking the time. I have one more kind of a fun little question. It's a new one I'm trying out. So I wanted to ask you if you have any reading recommendations, any books you're reading at the moment, or other books that you'd recommend to listeners.
If you find a book called The Fraud, it's about uh, the Labour Together project, right, and all of the misgivings of the Labour Party at the moment. It's a real deep dive and expose into everything that they've done, and especially how they use anti-Semitism claims to smear Jeremy Corbyn and ruin the left of Labour and take control of the party. It's a really important book that I think should be on everyone's reading list.
Especially with these elections coming up. So thank you so much, Mothin Ali. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us.
No, my pleasure. Absolutely loved being here. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. What Do We Want is produced by Troy Miller and We Act Radio. Don't forget to like and subscribe on whatever platform you're getting this on. We'll see you next time.